Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to all of our attendees from across the OSCE region. We had a fantastic opening day yesterday of the Alliance Conference with hundreds of participants on our Zoom and our live stream from all across the OSCE region, stretching from Central Asia and the Russian Federation to North America, and everywhere in between. A really fantastic start to the conference. Already some powerful messages were emerging from the discussions, including our opening statements, our keynote addresses, and panel one. And we are really excited to see where the content takes us today. And we're going to have two panels this afternoon. The first one will be on working smarter. How do we figure out how to amplify prosecution across the OSCE region by really using all the tools at our disposal? And the second panel will be on victim-centered approaches. How do we work with those who are harmed by this crime to maximize their experience and the justice that they are entitled to, as well as to hold offenders accountable? So I'm delighted with the great list of speakers we have for today, and I'm going to begin by turning it over to our friend Kevin Highland for moderation of the first panel. Kevin, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Val, for the introduction and for putting this very important event together, and to all your team there in Vienna and your other partners in Warsaw and around the world. Before we start this panel, I'd just like to do a bit of housekeeping really first. Could I remind all participants and speakers that whilst you are not participating, can you make sure that your microphones are on mute and that your video is on mute? That just helps the running of the day. Secondly, the first 30 minutes of the presentation will have a speaker list for floor requests that will be created. Those who are going to make requests to speak, could they do so through that process on the speaker list? Questions will be via Evan at the OSCE on the questions and answers link that you will see of participants. Can I also point out that this is coming today in 6 languages. You can see at the bottom of your screen the interpretation. If you are on a phone, then there will be a link to that also, and there are 6 languages that you can have this translated in live time. And also, if there are any technical problems, IT issues, can I ask you go to IT host via chat, and they will resolve those problems. Let's go ahead with this now today. This is about a crime of abuse. This is about a crime about victims. So I want us to start now this session, where I'll hand over to the OSCE, where they will now present a video telling us from the heart what this whole issue is about.
Hi, my name is Sean Wheeler. I am so grateful to be allowed to appear before you today, even if it is just by video. I have clearly decided to come on with full name, full face. I am a survivor, and clearly I'm a guy as well. What happened to me started very early, and the abuse that I lived through went on for most of my childhood. I learned about sex, started learning about it around age 2. And by age 5, I was introduced to a first network that I became part of. At age 7, I was used in the making of child pornography with another boy and a girl, and I believe there were 3 adults there. And by that point in time, the network had me where people just sort of came and found me and traded me around. I look for every chance I can to tell a story, because my biggest concern, I think, is that people often do not recognize that boys are trafficked as well. And in fact, an organization called ECPAT, E-C-P-A-T, did a study in 2016, and it showed that the number of victims are pretty much equal for male and female. And so, but boys have very limited voices and are often marginalized in the ways that they're allowed to speak. And I've been told some pretty incredible things that were really kind of cruel. I've been told that boys can't be sexually abused, that they enjoy it. And I've had people ask me, why didn't you just run away? Which is an interesting question. You know, when I was used in pornography at 7, I thought when I heard that question, where was I going to go? I was out in a farmhouse away from our town. I had no clothes on. I was surrounded by adults and inside anyway. Exactly how was I going to run somewhere? So those kinds of things are often sort of spoken to guys who are survivors, and we feel often marginalized, and that has been my biggest challenge, to get the message out there, to tell people that the boys are very much a part of the trafficking networks in equal numbers to girls. Was my trafficker prosecuted? No, as far as I know, never. He is the person who was the ringleader has long since passed away. I don't know if he was ever prosecuted. The rest to me are just strangers. I really don't know who they are or were, and that was decades ago. So I certainly remember the events, but in terms of prosecutions, I can't tell you if anybody ever faced prosecution for it or not. What does justice mean to me? Justice means to me having an equal voice, being recognized that as a male survivor, my story counts and it matters, and not being told that, you know, that I have to take second place to anyone, because, you know, all victims should count, and whether it's one time or 1,000 times. I mean, in all honesty, I can't tell you how many times I was gotten, how many people I was introduced to, but I can tell you for the first 20 years of my life, 17 of those I was sexually active, at least, if not 18. So justice for me means being heard. My recommendations for investigators, and I'll wrap up with this, is simply this: when you do these sting operations, please have somebody operate as a male provider. Now, often what I was told, it was like father-son kind of thing, and is one way to entice people. I work with a group in Arizona in the United States called Veterans for Child Rescue, and they conduct sting operations with the local law enforcement in the Arizona, Tucson, Phoenix area, and they have people pose as males who are selling their boys or females selling girls. And so, you know, it's really not going to cost you any extra money to have one of your investigators pretend or represent themselves as a boy or someone selling a boy. But please give them a voice in the process, in the sting operations, because you'll be surprised how many people respond to that. Thank you for listening to me, and the folks getting this video know how to contact me. If anyone wishes to reach out, I welcome that to my email. Thank you very much, and may God bless your work, and bless you too.
So that video really shows us the challenges we have. And when you see a victim speak like that, with such humility and such passion, the two things that jumped out there was, he said he wanted an equal voice and to be heard. Do we actually do that when we are responding to this serious violation of human rights and this serious crime, which generates so much money? And as we heard from Val Ritchie yesterday, only 1 in over 2,000 victims receives justice. So before we move on to the session with our speakers, can I just remind people to mute their sound and their video if they are not the actual speaker, just so that we have the best bandwidth that we can have. But also, can I also remind the speakers that it's 8 minutes, which we're going to be very strict on, and the OSCE is going to remind me when the 8 minutes is reached. And those participating from the floor, it is 2 minutes participation, please. And again, we need to keep those time limits strict. Today, the panel I'm joined with come from the US, from Bulgaria, and a person who's working now at Eurojust, from Belarus, and from Israel. And we have a wide range of experience and expertise. When I was a police officer and I convicted quite a large number of traffickers, one of the things that I saw was that perhaps resources weren't being used effectively. Yes, we conducted operations using, as my experience was, covert methods, financial methods, but is that being used widely? And this panel today brings those expertise to discuss how we can work smarter to enhance investigations and prosecutions. Why do we rely always on a victim? Is there other ways to get the evidence? Can we convict using covert measures? Can we convict using financial measures? And do we always strip the assets from the criminals? Or can they regroup very quickly, particularly if they do not receive a long-term or any term of imprisonment? So we're going to start this afternoon with Mr. Barry Koch, who is a commissioner from the financial sector of the Commission on Modern Slavery and Human Trafficking and the Liechtenstein Initiative, as it's known in the United States. So Barry, the floor is yours and over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Hello, everyone. And thank you for the invitation to speak. I've been asked to speak today from the perspective of someone who has held senior positions in the financial industry and who has been a prosecutor. As a starting point, let me share my view unequivocally that using financial data and financial records to prosecute human trafficking cases is an effective weapon in the fight to end trafficking. Using financial data and financial records has been effective in identifying victims and perpetrators, in proving coercion, which is a required element in a criminal charge, in corroborating witness testimony, or supporting allegations when a witness does not recall specific dates or transactions, and in serving as the basis for asset forfeitures, that is, seizing the properties, the expensive homes and cars and other assets of the traffickers. And the property that is subject to asset forfeiture includes real property, houses, restaurants, stores, hotels, farms, office parks. It includes tangible personal property, cash, jewelry, art, boats, airplanes, and cars, and intangible personal property, professional licenses like medical, pharmacy, and liquor licenses, as well as investment accounts, business permits, website domain names,
Montana, California,
and virtual currency. So you can see that asset forfeiture is a powerful disruptor of the trafficker's business model. In bringing criminal prosecutions, the government can use the narratives in suspicious activity reports to highlight the trafficker's motives or to demonstrate the trafficker's knowledge of the initial illegal activity. These reports can also identify co-conspirators by showing where the money goes, and can also identify initial victims. And if witnesses are reluctant to testify because of a threat of violence against them or family members, or the risk of being deported, or even because of the fear of being prosecuted themselves, the reports and the underlying financial records can be used to pursue other criminal charges that may not require testimony. For example, prosecutors may bring a case against a trafficker for tax evasion and money laundering, where the trafficker's tax returns report minimal income and assets, yet the financial records refute those tax returns by illustrating a lavish lifestyle. From the perspective of financial monitoring and criminal prosecution of traffickers, I would offer the following 8 suggestions for your consideration. 1, make greater use of the asset forfeiture laws. If that requires legislative or regulatory changes, those should be evaluated and discussed. Here I would point out that in the US, there is a significant difference between the criminal and civil asset forfeiture paths. The former requires a prior conviction of the trafficker, while the latter does not. In the Jeffrey Epstein case, for example, the authorities are seeking to seize many of his assets even without a conviction. 2, consider expanding the ability of using forfeited assets to provide victim services and other appropriate remedies to survivors. 3, expand the scope of prosecution to facilitators. 4, cryptocurrency and the dark web. Cryptocurrency regulations around the world are inconsistent, creating opportunities for criminals to maintain anonymity and to evade monitoring. There is a need for global minimum standards. Related to this issue, law enforcement should share appropriate information with the financial industry about use of the dark web to advertise persons for sale. 5, always consider using expert witnesses in your case, psychologists, medical professionals, social workers, victim advocates, to explain to the judge and jury why victims might recant their testimony, why they might minimize or change their story, omit or withhold information, and are reluctant to testify against their traffickers. Use the experts to explain unfamiliar language and slang regarding the sex trade, especially in electronic communications and text messages. 6, provide immigration relief for confirmed victims whose immigration status creates a fear of deportation. This will encourage more victims to testify at trials, will enhance the relationships between victims and law enforcement, and is a more humane way to treat survivors. 7, evaluate whether certain businesses that are higher risk for sex trafficking or labor trafficking should be required to post hotline signs. Hotels, agricultural labor contractors, adult entertainment services, airports, train stations and bus stations, hospitals and urgent care centers are all examples of higher risk businesses. And 8, encourage financial institutions to conduct a periodic risk assessment to evaluate their exposure to human trafficking. This would lead to the identification of additional controls, which in turn would lead to more suspicious transaction reports being filed with the authorities, which in turn would mean that more actionable intelligence is being provided to law enforcement to initiate and pursue cases. These risk assessments should include evaluating the trafficking risk in client supply chains. And finally, the financial industry and government must pay greater attention to the nexus between human trafficking and terror financing. As the Financial Action Task Force has pointed out, the Islamic State has conducted in-person slave auctions in areas that they control and online slave auctions as a fundraising mechanism. And Boko Haram has used kidnapping for ransom and enslavement to support their fighters. Surprisingly, very few national risk assessments consider human trafficking as a risk for terror funding. This should be re-examined. Thank you very much. Back to you, Kevin.
Thank you, Barry, for that really enlightening presentation and those recommendations, which covered a wide range of how finances can really make a difference to your investigation, and also covering areas like immigration and also terrorist funding, which is a subject that was discussed by the UN Security Council, and there was actually decisions made out of that. So we need to make sure that they are followed up. But one thing in particular you mentioned there, Barry, was the Al Capone method, which is very crucial, where it was Al Capone was actually imprisoned for tax evasion, not for all the other crime that he committed. So it's an important aspect to remember that there's more than one way, to term a phrase, to skin a cat. So thank you very much for that, Barry. Now we're going to move over to a representative from Eurojust, Mrs. Ivanka Kotorova, who is the chair of Eurojust Anti-Trafficking in Human Beings subgroup and a national member for Bulgaria. I had the pleasure and the expertise to work with Eurojust on a number of prosecutions, including with Bulgaria, Romania, Poland, and a number of other Eurojust member countries, which were always very successful. So I'd now like to hand over to Ivanka, who will give a presentation on how Eurojust can assist and how multilateral cooperation is crucial. Over to you now, Ivanka.
Dear colleagues, thank you very much for inviting me in this very interesting, important conference. Now I'm a representative of Eurojust. At the same time, I have a double capacity as a Bulgarian national member and as a public prosecutor. At the same time, as a member, I'm acting as a member of anti-trafficking team at Eurojust. What is the Eurojust? Eurojust is an agency of European Union, financed from the European Union budget and created in 2002, following the creation of Schengen and opening the internal borders of European Union, when there was a keen realization that since criminals cross borders, justice authorities also need to cooperate very closely. Eurojust is not replacing member states, but instead making sure it's possible to work together. The organization has a unique decentralized structure where prosecutors and investigative judges from the member states and some third countries work side by side, but still operate within their national legal system. Each member state appoints a national member like me, a senior prosecutor or investigative judge, together with our teams, which we call national desks. We are the first contact points for national authorities from the prosecution office, from the court, who turn to us asking for assistance with cross-border criminal investigation. Together, the national members, 26 national members, form the college, which is Eurojust's governing body. The college elects the president of Eurojust, who currently is Mr. Ladislav Hamran from the Slovak Republic, who steers the college together with two vice presidents. Eurojust staff supports the prosecutors in investigative judges during their daily work and provide analytical support. On 12 December last year, Eurojust entered a new phase in its development as it became the European Union Agency for Criminal Justice Cooperation with the application of new Eurojust Regulation 7027. On this slide, you can see the results of our work in 2019 when we managed as an organization to register almost around 4,000 new cases. The investigation of trafficking in human beings, cross-border cases, may bring a lot of complications caused by different reasons. For example, perpetrators, victims, witnesses, they have a different residence in different countries. The crime itself is committed on different territory. There are a number of accompanying offenses, for example, falsifying of documents, torture, money laundering, illegal migrant smuggling, and others. Investigations in many countries maybe have a different stage of progress. They must be various combination of perpetrators, accomplices, problems concerning legal qualifications. Yesterday was mentioned that in different countries there is still pending differences in legal qualifications of trafficking in human beings. Legal principle, non bis in idem, as there might be two or more criminal proceedings against the same perpetrators in several countries. How do we work in order to overcome all these possible obstacles? With a demand-driven organization, a prosecutor or other competent authorities from member states can contact the respective national desk at Eurojust with regard to a specific criminal case, asking for assistance. The respective national desk can open a new case towards all countries involved into the offense. It doesn't matter whether they're member states or not. Our main tools in our judicial legal cooperations are coordination meetings, coordination centers, and joint investigation teams. Coordination meetings brings national judicial authority from different member states and even from different third country at the same table at Eurojust to facilitate the exchange of information or evidence, the execution of mutual legal assistance, European arrest warrant, and many other legal instruments, even to prevent and resolve the conflict of jurisdiction or other legal or evidential problems. All countries involved in coordination meetings the authorities of this country can easily discuss and agree upon investigative steps and even prosecution strategies during these meetings. Coordination centers is another tool used in complex cases which require real-time exchange of information in the context of large-scale common actions executed simultaneously in different member states. What is do Eurojust in this situation? Eurojust make to facilitate the link between different participants from different member states, different countries via dedicated telephone lines and computers. Information is quickly passed from one authorities to another authorities. Another very successful tool in our work is joint investigation teams. Joint investigation team is the most advanced tool in our work. What is the essence of joint investigation team? Joint investigation team is a legal agreement between two or more countries with a purpose to undertake joint transnational criminal investigations during a fixed period of time, including the intensive and direct exchange of information and evidence between the members of the team. Eurojust provides financial and logistical support to joint investigation teams, expertise, and judicial analysis as well. Let me to give you an example of a case, a very successful case, at the same time very complex case of human trafficking dealt with by Eurojust, which actually involved two joint investigation teams within the framework of two different international operations named Palma and Leerdam. Organized crime group was active in trafficking human beings and money laundering between 2003 and 2016. Bulgarian women were trafficked from Bulgaria to Netherlands and Belgium for purpose of sexual exploitation, and 5 parallel investigations were initiated. 2 coordination meetings in 2015 and 16 were organized at Eurojust, and it was planned a common action day in September 2016. The outcome of the common action day was 10 members of organized crime group were arrested, simultaneous search and seizure were conducted in 3 countries simultaneously, a lot of evidence, documents, drugs were seized, a lot of assets, cash, vehicles, real estate were found and secured. A lot of witnesses were interrogated the same day.
Can I just come in there, please, Mrs. Kotarova? Your time is up now, but there'll be another minute or so for you to wrap up your session. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. You can see on the last slide our cooperation agreements with different member states, different states outside of European Union.
So thank you very much for that presentation. And as I said at the beginning, you know, my own personal experience with Eurojust, it allowed us to conduct covert operations, to access finance, as Barry has said earlier, and to really gather evidence across several countries at the same time. And the support that Eurojust gave us was crucial, and the fact that that was a joint agreement in a legal document really empowered us to convict many criminals. Some of those cases are extremely large, with as many, in some cases, as up to 100 victims involved across European countries. So I personally understand the benefits of Eurojust and have really received support from them, also with the financial support they give around travel and accommodation and interpretation. So thank you very much for that presentation, really welcomed. I will now move on to Belarus, and we have Mr. Alexander Siganok, who is going to present on the role of investigations as a person who works in investigations and policing, as it were. Again, I had the pleasure of working with the police in Belarus in joint investigations covering Poland and wider areas. So if I could now hand over to you, Mr. Siganok, for your presentation. Thank you very much.
Спасибо, Кевин. Спасибо, Кевин. Приветствую всех участников конференции. Благодарю организаторов за предоставленную возможность выступить на мероприятии столь высокого уровня и поделиться опытом Республики Беларусь в выявлении преступлений в сфере торговли людьми, получении доказательств противоправной деятельности виновных лиц и привлечении к предусмотренной законом ответственности. За последние годы в Республике Беларусь проделана большая работа по сокращению масштабов торговли людьми. Вместе с тем, эта проблема продолжает оставаться актуальной для нашей страны в настоящее время. В примерах расследования уголовных дел я поделюсь существующими в Беларуси практиками выявления и закрепления доказательств, позволяющими минимизировать зависимость следствия от показаний жертвы и повторную травматизацию жертвы, в том числе методикой контролируемой поставки, применение которых способствует исключению вынесения судами подачи на приговор. Одним из ярких примеров успешного расследования при минимальной зависимости следствия от показаний жертвы является уголовное дело в отношении гражданки Республики Беларусь С, которая с 2014 года по февраль 2016 года, находясь на территории Республики Беларусь, с использованием сети интернет, завербовала для оказания услуг сексуального характера не менее 89 девушек из Украины, Республики Казахстан, Республики Беларусь, Российской Федерации и других государств, после чего разместила их эротические фотографии на специализированных ресурсах сети интернет по рекламированию предоставления услуг сексуального характера и обеспечила их доставку в Турецкую Республику. После прибытия в Турцию и заселения в отеле девушки не могли влиять на ситуацию. С, используя анкеты жертв сети интернет, определяла им клиентов, их количество, время работы, стоимость и виды услуг, а также сумму доходов, которые девушки обязаны были перечислять после встреч с клиентами. Первоначальная информация о возможности торговли людьми поступила в подразделение Министерства внутренних дел Республики Беларусь по противодействию торговли людьми в результате проведенного финансового мониторинга. Так, за указанный период времени посредством услуг международных платежных систем получила денежные средства в размере около $400 тысяч США. При этом она не работала и являлась студенткой университета. Для проверки данной информации станции прокуроров в отношении С организовали прослушивание телефонных переговоров, в ходе которых зафиксировали разговоры о работе подконтрольных девушек и снятие информации с технических каналов связи, которым установлено посещение С специализированных ресурсов сети интернет по рекламированию услуг сексуального характера, по бронированию номеров в отелях, по продаже авиабилетов и других. С учетом полученных доказательств по месту жительства С санкционированный произведен обыск, в ходе которого изъят ноутбук и мобильный телефон, где обнаружены доказательства приобретения девушкам авиабилетов, бронированием отелей, размещения эротических фотографий и банкеток на специализированных ресурсах сети интернет, переписки по вопросам оказания услуг сексуального характера, а также распределения денежных средств от данного вида деятельности. Важную роль при сборе доказательной базы сыграли финансовые исследования. Так, в банковских учреждениях и в инспекции Министерства Республики Беларусь по налогам и сборам истребованы сведения о полученных и отправленных денежных средствах, в том числе с использованием международных платежных систем Western Union, MoneyGram и других. Также я хочу поделиться примером успешного расследования уголовного дела, где использовалось специальное мероприятие «Контролируемая поставка». в ходе которого перекрыт действовавший более 2 лет канал торговли людьми из Беларуси в Израиль. В результате совместных мероприятий ликвидирована транснациональная преступная организация. Задержания проводились одновременно в 2 странах. В городе Минске задержан один из организаторов преступной группы, 57-летний гражданин Израиля. В это же время полиция государства Израиль задержала других 4 активных участников преступного формирования. И сексуального рабства освобождены 7 девушек, гражданок Беларуси. Преступники используют различные способы вербовки и доставки жертв в Израиль. В основном в Беларуси вербовщик осуществлял их подбор на сайте знакомств, после чего в ходе личной встречи, телефонных переговоров разъяснял им благоприятные условия предстоящей работы, убеждал в безопасности пребывания на территории иностранного государства. После получения согласия он фотографировал девушек с целью отбора и проводил их инструктаж их действий в аэропорту города Тель-Авива при прохождении пограничного паспортного контроля. Его сообщники в государстве Израиль направляли несоответствующие действительности приглашения для прибытия в иностранное государство, приобретали авиабилеты, организовали встречу в аэропорту, после чего отвозили и размещали жертв на съемных квартирах, выполняли функции сопровождения охраны, а также осуществляли подбор клиентов, при необходимости доставку к месту нахождения клиентов, изымали часть вырученных денежных средств. При этом роли преступников были четко распределены. С целью изобличения всех участников международной преступной группы подразделением МВД Республики Беларусь во взаимодействии с полицией государства Израиль в станции прокурора проведено оперативно-розыскное мероприятие «Оперативный эксперимент», в ходе которого одна из завербованных девушек выбыла в сопровождении сотрудника МВД из города Минска в город Тель-Авив, где под контролем сотрудников полиции Израиля приняло участие в проведении оперативных мероприятий по изобличению и задержанию иных участников преступной группы. В соответствии с законодательством Республики Беларусь в отношении всех пострадавших от торговли людьми применены меры по безопасности, по реабилитации и защите. Основным преимуществом использования метода контролируемой поставки является возможность получения неопровержимых доказательств деятельности с единым умыслом участников преступного сообщества, находящихся на территории разных государств. Вместе с тем, для обеспечения безопасности участвующих в таком оперативном мероприятии лиц, оно подлежит тщательной подготовке и планированию, оценке всех возможных рисков, необходимости постоянного взаимодействия заинтересованных подразделений разных стран. Одновременно с приведенными положительными примерами в расследовании преступлений в сфере торговли людьми есть определенные сложности. Связано это с тем, что преступная деятельность данной категории уголовных дел охватывает, как правило, территории нескольких государств и действует, соответственно, различные законодательства. Но это обстоятельство не мешает деятельности преступников. Наоборот, сегодняшние информационные технологии позволяют им действовать еще быстрее. Они могут мгновенно общаться с использованием различных мессенджеров, передавать и размещать необходимую информацию в сети интернет, использовать в качестве платежных средств криптовалюты и другие современные технологии. Преступники делают все быстро и не имеют каких-либо для этого препятствий. Что же касается правоохранительных органов, то для проверки необходимой информации, получения и закрепления доказательств преступной деятельности аферов порой необходимы месяцы, а иногда и годы. Поэтому предлагаем активнее использовать платформу ОБСЕ для налаживания контактов между представителями правоохранительных органов государств-участников ОБСЕ, обмена опытом проведения оперативно-розыскных мероприятий и следственных действий по этой категории преступлений, а также обучение сотрудников, занимающихся расследованием торговли людьми, для повышения их уровня квалификации в этой сфере. Спасибо за внимание.
Thank you for that really excellent presentation on techniques that are required and techniques that you have carried out, looking at how you gather evidence, looking at covert measures, including phone tapping, surveillance, looking at online, and the actions that you took to support victims as well. I think that's a really good example of what is necessary, and that, you know, endorsed by the work of, as we've heard from, you know, from Barry earlier and from Eurojust, shows what is available out there and what can be achieved. That's a great example of that. So thank you. We're now going to move on to Miss Rahel Kushuni, Khashoggi, who is an independent expert from Israel, who has got extensive knowledge and experience on dealing with cases of human trafficking and modern slavery, and will come from a policy side and her experience of dealing with this shocking issue. So over to you, Ms. Khashoggi.
Thank you very much. First of all, hello to you all, though I don't see any of you. I'm very happy to be here. I'm going to speak about an issue which permeates all trafficking cases, and that is the weaknesses in victim behavior and statements, and how to address them. This is a key issue because however much we try to gather other evidence, the victim is often a key piece of evidence in trafficking cases. So what are the weaknesses? First of all, it's very hard to achieve cooperation with victims because many have lost their trust in the world. Second of all, it's hard to explain their behavior. Why do they not escape or seek help at the first opportunity? Thirdly, it is even doubly or trebly hard to explain statements that victims often make, like, the trafficker was my best friend. So what we end up with is that whereas in other cases, the prosecutor's challenge is to identify the weaknesses in the case, in these cases, the challenge is to identify the case amid the weaknesses. How do we do this? What do we do? The only way to do it is to dig very deep, to expose the entire picture. What happened before the trafficking? What happened during? What happened afterwards? What are the victim's vulnerabilities? What are the circumstances that surround his seeming consent to the exploitation? Without this information, the judges tend to judge the victim's behavior on the basis of their own worldview. How would I behave? Why isn't the victim behaving as I would behave? However, if the prosecutor, the police officer, exposes and reveals the victim's vulnerabilities, the question becomes otherwise. The question becomes, this victim is different than me. He is behaving in a different way because he's vulnerable. For this reason, for prosecutors to build a case, they must allow judges to dig deeper. They themselves must unturn every stone and know every detail in order to expose to the judge what the case is about. Now, this work cannot be done by national legislation. There is good national legislation, and for example, which states that consent to the victim is irrelevant to the trafficking crime. Now, it would seem that this kind of national legislation would neutralize victim behavior like not escaping, because then we would say, well, but even if that denotes consent, it's irrelevant. However, in a UNODC issue paper, it was revealed that it doesn't matter what the national legislation says. Judges will always try to understand why the victim consented, and if they don't understand, they will exonerate. Why is this so? Well, first of all, judges are criminal justice practitioners, and as such, they are used to considering consent as extremely important. For example, in rape or in assault cases, consent is the whole difference between an act which is criminal and an act which is permitted. Another reason is, as in rape cases, the victim is the main piece of evidence. So it is very hard to ignore his behavior or her behavior and statements. And third of all, because in the modern world, autonomy is such a very important value, we all believe that even if someone made a bad choice, well, we should allow him to express that choice. So for all these reasons, national legislation on consent is not going to help the prosecutor. He still needs to dig deeper. The same goes for vulnerability. Some national legislations have specific means, which is abuse of a position of vulnerability, and some don't. But whatever the national legislation, if the judge does not understand what the vulnerabilities of the victim are, he will tend to exonerate because he will ask that question we talked about. why is the victim not behaving as I would behave? Well, this kind of digging deeper has vast practical import and can make the difference between exoneration and conviction. I'll give you an example of an Australian case, Kovacs. In this case, a woman from the Philippines was trafficked for sexual and labor exploitation. Now, she worked in a takeaway store in full view of the public every day, and she had access to a phone and to mail. However, she did not attempt to escape or seek help for 5 months. Now, this could have conceivably led to an exoneration because the judge could have said, well, she's not credible. If it was so bad, why didn't she try to escape? He could have said, oh, she consented and I cannot understand why she would do that. And therefore it's not trafficking. But the judge, the prosecutor, dug deeper and discovered that she came from a situation of dire poverty, that her mother was ill and she didn't want to cause her further problems, that she knew no English, that she was not familiar with the culture and therefore believed what the abuser said to her, that if she tried to escape, she would be arrested. Also, she told the court that there was a stigma in Filipino society for engaging in sexual relations, even if you're coerced. So for all these reasons, because of the digging deeper, the court understood her failure to escape and seek help as in itself a mark of the strength of the perpetrator's level of control over her. Now, in addition to the vulnerabilities which are clear, there are hidden vulnerabilities which are not easy to see. Those are emotional vulnerabilities. And if the court does not dig deeper to discover them, it will tend to exonerate. This is very well shown in 2 Israeli cases with very similar facts. In both, the charismatic man gathered around him women and children, controlled every aspect of their lives, forced them to work for him, and give him all the proceeds. In one case, there was a conviction because the judge, even though the victims were articulate, intelligent Israeli citizens, dug deeper and discovered what their vulnerabilities were. He discovered that they had emotional vulnerabilities. They were in crisis. They had a very bad family situations. These were things which were not evident on the surface. On the other hand, in the other case, the judges did not dig deeper and exonerated the perpetrator because they judged the victim's behavior as they judged their own behavior. Why didn't the victims escape? They had support systems in Israel. They were articulate, intelligent women. Why didn't they behave as we would behave? So my last message, my last word is that trafficking cases present difficulties and always will present difficulties and require an investment of time. There's no escaping from this. A prosecutor who does the work and digs deeper will discover the case amid the weaknesses. He will discover that the long way is actually the short way. Thank you.
Thank you, Rahel, for that very clear and situation regarding victims, and something that we all need to think about. And that, as you say, this is not going to be solved short term. This is a long-term process. And I like the fact that you highlighted vulnerability, and also the fact that bad choices doesn't take away the issue of consent. It should be better understood, as you clearly say. So thank you very much for that presentation. We're now going to move to interventions from the floor. These are going to be 2-minute sessions. I would ask that those presenting these are concise and keep to the 2 minutes. Could I also remind people to switch off their cameras, so mute their cameras and their speaker unless they are actually participating. So we're first going to go to Liechtenstein. The delegation is in person in Austria, in Vienna, and that will be followed by the EU delegation who are also present in Vienna today. So Liechtenstein, if you could take the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, Excellencies, dear colleagues. We commend the organizers for convening this year's conference, and we thank the panelists for their insightful contributions. The shocking state of affairs regarding human trafficking and modern slavery, worsened by the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, requires us to take new approaches, also by enhancing investigations and prosecutions. Following the money can not only lead us to the perpetrators, but also deny them the resources they need to commit such crimes. The role of the financial sector is of paramount importance. Financial institutions may handle funds generated by human trafficking and modern slavery. They invest, wittingly or unwittingly, in businesses relying on forced labor, and they risk violating a variety of existing laws. The Finance Against Slavery and Trafficking Initiative, FAST, launched by Liechtenstein together with Australia and the Netherlands, and with the support of the United Nations University, aims to engage the financial sector to tackle modern slavery by focusing on the areas of compliance, investment, and innovation. During the FAST elaboration phase, we counted on the support of leading international experts. We benefited immensely from the OSCE's step-by-step guide to financial investigations, and also from Barry Koch's vast experience. He was driving force behind the elaboration of the FAST product, and we thank him also for his contribution in this panel today. Last September, we presented the FAST blueprint at the UNGA in New York, which launched us into the current phase of dissemination and implementation. We are therefore looking to forge new partnerships, in particular with financial institutions. At the same time, the OSCE will remain a key forum during the implementation phase, and we look forward to a continued close cooperation. Of course, financial institutions themselves should be at the center of the implementation, while governments and civil society can continue playing a crucial role. We would like to conclude by assuring the OSCE Office of the Special Representative and Coordinator for Combating Trafficking in Human Beings of our support. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that presentation. We're now going to be with the EU delegation, who are also in person in Vienna, and that will be followed by Canada.
Thank you very much. And the EU would like to thank all the panelists for sharing their experience and expertise. We agree with much of what has been said during the session. The perpetrators are using new technologies in their advantage. However, in the same time, the potential of new technologies can and should be used to enhance investigations and prosecution of perpetrators. Work on conducting efficient financial investigations should continue, and international cooperation and coordination between relevant intelligence and law enforcement, prosecutional and judicial authorities should be strengthened in order to intensify the exchange of information and streamline investigations. As demonstrated in the 2018 European Commission's second progress report, some improvements were made in recent years within the EU. EU agencies and member states report an increase on cross-border cooperation and joint investigations, as also illustrated by Ms. Kotorova. Also with an increase in the number of joint investigation teams set up with non-EU countries, especially countries in the Western Balkans. An increase in the awareness and use of financial investigations has been observed, and measures have been taken to make investigations more effective. We would like to commend the OSCE Special Representative and Coordinator for Combating Trafficking in Human Beings for the recent publication, Leveraging Innovation to Fight Trafficking in Human Beings and Comprehensive Analysis of Technology Tools. We share your view that this is a useful tool will help participating states to harness the power of technologies to enhance investigations and prosecution of perpetrators, as well as the provision of assistance to victims. The challenges and opportunities of new technologies in addressing trafficking in human beings are of particular relevance in the context of the current pandemic. Since we know that there are many prosecutors, judges, and members of the law enforcement taking part of this conference today, we would like to ask, if time allows, whether any of these actors would be ready to share their own experience or how new technology could be used to overcome a lack of evidence in specific cases. We would also be interested to hear more on the main challenges faced when it comes to cross-border judicial cooperation. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that contribution. We're now moving to Canada, which will be followed by the United Kingdom. Canada via Zoom, United Kingdom in person.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, for giving me the floor. As it is the first time that I take the floor, I would like to thank Mr. Ricci and the entire team for this already quite useful and interesting event. I would also like to thank the panelists for their presentations. As others already did, we will focus our intervention today on this panel on the use of financial intelligence. First, we would like to thank the OSCE for its hard work on the Following the Money Compendium of Resources step-by-step guide pilot projects on this issue. We would like to commend them as well on the recent work just published on technology, and also share our thanks to all those who contributed to the FAST initiative. We recommend that all participating states implement these best practices and pull together the necessary partnerships between financial institutions, financial investigation units, and law enforcement to incorporate financial intelligence to its human trafficking investigation. The Financial Transactions and Reports Analysis Center of Canada, also known as FINTRAC, is Canada's financial intelligence unit and has actively leveraged its partnerships within the public and private sectors to proactively target individuals and entities suspected to be involved in the laundering of funds derived from human trafficking for the purpose of sexual exploitation. One of the projects that FINTRAC participated in is Project Protect, which relies on the public-private partnerships, PPPs, with Canadian businesses, police, and law enforcement agencies across Canada. Through Project Protect, FINTRAC has actively engaged in financial institutions and law enforcement to target human trafficking in the sex trade. The success of Project Protect and subsequent PPPs has stressed the importance and value of financial intelligence in law enforcement investigations. Project Protect has allowed for a strong channel of communication between the private and the public sphere, creating a process that has resulted in proactive investigation based on the information from the private sector. This has increased the speed and capacity of the Canadian regime to proactively target more sophisticated crime without requiring legislative changes to do so. The successful execution of Project Protect has paved the way for other PPPs dedicated to proactively target illicit activities such as fentanyl trafficking, romance scams, money laundering, and online child sexual exploitation. By leveraging valuable financial intelligence to FINTRAC PPP model, the Canadian regime has enhanced their investigative procedures, leading to successful prosecutions. We thought it would be useful to provide additional information on how we establish a PPP to combat human trafficking. Specific projects or initiatives are advanced through PPPs when an issue is identified among various stakeholders or regime partners, and it is determined that using the PPP framework would assist in addressing the issue of topic of concern. As part of contributing to a PPP, FINTRAC has its own internal policy and governance in which a proposed PPP is discussed and approved. Once FINTRAC participation is confirmed, FINTRAC works with other stakeholders involved in the PPP to further establish the project plan and each stakeholder contribution and role within the project and the PPP. Based upon the agreed upon project plan, each PPP stakeholder contributes as outlined with the project team meeting, either at agreed upon times or as needed to address any additional items that may be raised during the implementation. By collaborating with Canada's major banks and law enforcement, FINTRAC has also developed an operational alert indicator, the laundering of illicit proceeds of human trafficking for sexual exploitation.
I'm just going to have to
operational alert.
intervene there to say that you're over your 2 minutes. If you could wrap up now, please.
I will. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I'd like now to move to the United Kingdom, who are in person in Vienna, and then move on to the Holy See after that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. And thanks again to everyone involved in putting on another excellent session. Good afternoon, everyone. The UK government is committed to tackling the heinous crime of modern slavery and human trafficking, ensuring that those responsible are brought to justice. The UK's 2015 Modern Slavery Act gives law enforcement agencies the tools to tackle modern slavery, including a maximum life sentence for perpetrators and enhanced protection for victims. It also introduced the statutory defence for victims of modern slavery to protect those previously being prosecuted for crimes they were forced to commit by their exploiters. Since the Act became law, the number of live police operations has increased from 188 in December 2016 to at least 1,845 in June 2020. More potential victims are being identified and protected due to a greater awareness and improved understanding of modern slavery. In the year to September 2019, UK police recorded 6,544 offences of modern slavery, an increase of 53% on the previous year. The records for 2019 show completed prosecutions, convictions, and the conviction rate are all also up. There has also been a marked increase in the average number of victims giving evidence and being supported at court. The UK recognises that building trust and confidence with vulnerable witnesses is vital for successful investigations and prosecutions. Best practice information on how to investigate modern slavery cases is shared between police forces, and practitioners are able to access guidance and advice. Targeted training courses designed for police officers and staff working in a range of specialist roles have also been developed to ensure they strike the right balance between safeguarding the rights and needs of the victim and obtaining the best evidence. Mr. Moderator, though we are seeing an increase in the number of prosecutions brought and convictions secured, we acknowledge there is more to do to increase the overall numbers. However, we recognise that challenges remain. Police forces need to ensure that intelligence is developed and cases are investigated by officers who have the relevant skills, expertise, and access to specialist capabilities. Given the hidden nature and underreporting of modern slavery, it is important when law enforcement agencies are given the information to take action, they do so. The challenge of increasing complexity and shortage of specialist skills applies across policing, but modern slavery is further affected by its organised nature. The UK's National Crime Agency assesses that most modern slavery and human trafficking is almost certainly driven by organised crime, with the more sophisticated groups highly likely to engage in slavery and trafficking alongside other crime, including financial and immigration. However, live police modern slavery cases often need to be assessed as serious and organised crime so that they can attract the additional capabilities available. The movement across police force and international boundaries presents a challenge for investigators accustomed to operating within police force geographical boundaries. Modern slavery investigations are frequently the isolated efforts of well-motivated and tenacious individuals who use informal networks to negotiate their way through the police system. The policing response to modern slavery needs to adopt the methods, resources, and tactics ordinarily deployed when effectively responding to other serious and organised crime threats. As with other offences involving traumatised victims, it is possible for prosecutions to proceed without the need for victims to give evidence. However, there is evidence to suggest that it is difficult for the courts to appreciate the gravity of the offence without the victim, and in some cases this is reflected in the sentencing for substantive offences. If sentences for trafficking in human beings are consistently lower than for trafficking in other crimes, then we will not deter this type of exploitation. Mr. Moderator, the challenges are great, but we can meet them. Together, we can stop this horrendous crime, keep our people secure, and protect those enslaved and exploited across the globe. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that contribution. We'll now move on to the Holy See, who is presenting via Zoom. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The experiences that the international community is gaining in the field of prevention, persecution, and protection show us how powerful the transnational character of trafficking networks are. They can move loads of human beings, often avoiding regulatory or border controls. There is an increasingly urgent need for enhanced and well-functioning intergovernmental collaboration also in investigations. Judges and prosecutors, by virtue of their experience in implementing the law, can play important roles in soliciting and advising government. leading to binding legal frameworks that better combat human trafficking at the transnational level. To give a significant role to the investigations, it is necessary and urgent to strengthen the constant exchange of information between police forces, as described in NC Decision 508, which calls for increased cooperation by national enforcement and prosecution agencies with relevant international bodies, including Interpol and Europol, and with the law enforcement agencies of participating states, for example, through the issue of liaison officers or joint investigative teams. Undoubtedly, the latest technological research can significantly aid our efforts in investigating and analysis. For the success of these actions, it is essential that civil society, the public academia, and the private sectors are involved in order to spur greater governmental action. In fact, participating states, in the addendum to the OSCE Action Plan to combat trafficking human beings 1 decade later, acknowledged that while the primary responsibility for combating and preventing trafficking in human beings rests within the participating states, the link of this phenomenon to transnational organized crime requires cooperation at the international and regional level, involving the private sector and relevant NGOs. It is also necessary to support an independent judiciary, especially when facing unscrupulous crime and third-party interests, which are unwilling to be involved in legal proceedings. Moreover, the positive role of the media can give support to these initiatives through awareness-raising campaigns that encourage a sense of responsibility, both in politics and in public opinion. The full version of the statement will be circulated. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you very much for that participation. We'll now move on to the Ambassador of the Sovereign Order of Malta, Mr. Michel Vuthi, followed by Uzbekistan.
Tient à remercier l'OSCE et le Bureau du représentant spécial et coordinateur de nous avoir invités à participer à cette importante conférence. L'Ordre de Malte renforce actuellement son engagement dans la prévention de la traite des êtres humains, la protection des victimes et la réhabilitation des survivants. La coopération au niveau national et international peut aider à résoudre les problèmes juridiques et à partager les bonnes pratiques. Tels étaient en tout cas les objectifs de la conférence que l'Ordre de Malte a organisée à Paris en octobre dernier sur le thème « Comment mieux lutter ensemble contre la traite sexuelle des femmes en Afrique de l'Ouest et soutenir leur réhabilitation ». Certains participants n'auraient jamais pu se rencontrer sans notre conférence. Au-delà des traités internationaux, des plans d'action nationaux, des enquêtes et des poursuites pénales, il y a toujours des êtres humains. Ils ont besoin de se faire confiance, de partager les bonnes pratiques, de former et d'être formés sur la manière d'identifier les victimes, de protéger et de réhabiliter les survivants et sur la manière d'enquêter et de mener les poursuites pénales. L'Ordre de Malte tient à souligner l'importance des organisations confessionnelles. Premièrement, pour secourir les victimes, les survivants font souvent davantage confiance à des personnes et à des organisations religieuses qu'à des assistants sociaux ou à la police. Deuxièmement, pour signaler ou convaincre la victime de porter plainte et collaborer avec la police. Et troisièmement, accompagner les victimes et les survivants tout au long des poursuites. La protection des membres de la famille de la victime est également essentielle pour obtenir la confiance et la coopération de la victime dans le cadre des poursuites. L'Ordre de Malte souhaite souligner la nécessité de renforcer les synergies entre les agences des Nations Unies, les organisations régionales et sous-régionales et la société civile. Ces coopérations sont absolument nécessaires pour prévenir les violations, protéger les victimes, poursuivre les responsables, partager recherches et expériences, sensibiliser et promouvoir l'action. Merci, Monsieur le modérateur.
Thank you very much for that participation. We're now going to move to Uzbekistan, followed by Armenia. Thank you.
Добрый день, уважаемые модераторы, уважаемые дамы и господа. Проблема, которую мы сегодня обсуждаем, является проблемой мирового масштаба, которая затрагивает в той или иной степени каждую страну. Факторы, способствующие торговле людьми, разнообразны, и в каждой стране они отличаются друг от друга. но все они вызывают особую озабоченность в условиях продолжающейся пандемии. Ограничения на передвижение, отмена международных рейсов и другие меры по сдерживанию распространения коронавируса привели к тому, что жертвам торговли людьми некуда бежать и некого просить о помощи. Торговцы живым товаром пользуются сложившейся ситуацией и нещадно эксплуатируют беззащитных людей. В настоящее время нет точных оценок по общему числу жертв торговли людьми в мире. Статистика в этом вопросе всегда сложна. Это связано в первую очередь с тем, что не все факты торговли людьми попадают в официальную уголовно-правовую статистику стран, поскольку торговля людьми по своему характеру является латентным преступлением, и жертвы торговли не всегда сообщают о совершенном в их отношении преступном деянии, либо опасаясь преследования со стороны торговцев людьми, не доверяя правоохранительной системе, либо не осознавая, что они стали жертвами столь опасного преступления. Кроме того, преступниками активно применяются самые новаторские подходы, о чем мы говорим сегодня в ходе нашего альянса, в большей степени зиждущихся на последних достижениях IT-технологий, что существенно осложняет задачу по определению масштаба проблемы в разных странах, в том числе и у нас в Узбекистане. Поскольку роль уголовного правосудия в противодействии торговле людьми заключается прежде всего в корректном взаимодействии судебных и правоохранительных органов, обеспечении неотвратимости ответственности за торговлю людьми, выявлению причин и условий, способствовавших совершению преступления в целях формирования единой судебной практики, по рассмотрению данной категории дел Верховным судом было принято постановление Пленума о судебной практике по делам о торговле людьми. Пленумом были даны разъяснения для судов в толковании и правильном применении основных терминов и понятий, таких как вербовка, эксплуатация человека, эксплуатация проституции, принудительный труд, рабство, подневольное состояние, перевозка, получение и другие дефиниции, правильное применение которых имеет существенное значение в отправлении правосудия при рассмотрении уголовных дел. В свете реформ, осуществляемых в последние годы в рамках стратегии действий по 5 приоритетным направлениям развития, был дан новый импульс в борьбе с преступностью, в частности с торговлей людьми. Большое внимание уделяется превентивным мерам. Так, вынесение судами частных определений по устранению причин и условий, способствующих совершению преступлений, публикация в средствах массовой информации судебных очерков по данной тематике, освещающих как выявление, привлечение к ответственности, так и последствия, наступившие для жертв, играют значительную роль в предупреждении и ранней профилактике преступлений в сфере торговли людьми. Для улучшения судебного преследования за преступления, связанные с торговлей людьми, нам следует сообща продолжить действия по информированию граждан об их праве отказаться от выполнения любой деятельности, не связанной с профессиональными обязанностями, без каких-либо последствий. Обеспечивать неукоснительное уголовное преследование лиц, причастных к торговле людьми, включая должностных лиц, вовлеченных в системный принудительный труд. Продолжить поддержку ННО, оказывающим помощь и предоставляющим убежище жертвам, которые не были приняты в государственные приюты. Учитывая, что проблему торговли людьми решить в одиночку не может ни одно государство, Верховный суд Узбекистана при Национальной комиссии по противодействию торговле и труду.
I'm afraid that your time is up.
Я заканчиваю.
Thank you. So thank you very much, Mr. Mirzayev, for your contribution there. We're now going to move to Armenia, followed by the Leadership Development Association, both of who will be speaking via Zoom. Thank you very much.
Здравствуйте. Позвольте вас поприветствовать из Армении. Мы благодарны организации ОБСЕ за организацию данного мероприятия, за предоставление возможности пообщаться, поделиться опытом в сфере борьбы с трафикингом, с торговлей людьми. Армения, как и всегда, и сейчас тем более привержена принципам ОБСЕ по данным вопросам борьбы с трафикингом, считаем современным злом, и в общей сложности наше законодательство соответствует международным стандартам, принципам ОБСЕ, но, как говорится, всегда есть место для совершенствования. В этом году мы уже ратифицировали Лансаротскую конвенцию по вопросам защиты прав детей от сексуального рабства и от сексуального насилия. Надеемся, что ратификация данной конвенции и развитие уголовного и уголовно-процессуального законодательства данной области более усовершенствует нашу борьбу с данным процессом. Также был принят закон о конфискации имущества, добытого незаконным путем, где также особо выделяется преступление с трафикингом, которые имущество, которое нажито также путем трафикинга, тоже подлежит конфискации. Как практикующий прокурор, который специализируется в вопросах трафикинга, исполняя функции прокурора по вопросам трафикинга, осуществляю надзор за следствием, защищаю обвинение в суде, а также состою в рабочей группе Совета по борьбе с трафикингом, а также в Совете, в комиссии по отождествлению жертв трафикинга. В связи с этим хотелось бы выделить пару вопросов всего, исходя из времени, которое нам предоставлено, которые актуальны. Я, как вижу, уже второй день актуальны не только в Армении, но и во всем мире. Это права потерпевших, вопросы их участия в следствии, дачи им показаний, изменения показаний, отказа от показаний, вопросы, связанные с свидетелями, а также особо хотел бы выделить громоздкость процессуального хода процессуальных действий. Уголовного за предоставленную возможность выступить на конференцию судебного производства. По-моему, надо придумать механизмы, которые...
Thank you for that contribution. We're now moving to the Leadership Development Association via Zoom, and that will be followed by the UN Peace University, our final participant on the floor. Thank you.
Good afternoon, dear ladies and gentlemen. Just the imagination of human trafficking in our century is mind-blowing, even without mentioning about real processes, because it causes all negative reaction that a living person can have. Don't misbelieve by the fact that when we're talking about human trafficking, we only mean the process of receiving monetary reward by an interested person or group for transferring a person as a commodity. Modern generation, compared to previous generation, models its goals and idea faster in order to be competitive in the world like a cattle season with information flows. This fact pleases such a phenomenon as an interpretation of the obvious in their own selfish interest, pulling out the original meaning. Human trafficking is an immoral phenomenon created by the humanity. Please pay attention to this. Different groups using various mechanisms and connections achieve their goals of transferring a person from point A to point B again their will. This also falls under the category of human trafficking, no matter it's a political order, selfish material goals, or something else. I'm not talking about the extradition of criminals proven by independent investigation, but some groups using this opportunity are doing what we are discussing here. For example, thousands of citizens who want to get to their countries because of the devastating consequences of the spread of COVID-19 and the lack of organization of their consistent delivery to their families in compliance with the recommended sanitary standards create new conditions for the emergence of such a phenomenon as trafficking in person. Since these citizens fall into the zone of vulnerability and high risk. Based on above mentioned, it's time to call the international political, economic, and scientific communities to move from half measures to full-scale decisive measures in order to eliminate this catastrophic injustice. Corruption, spread of lies, impunity, and indifference of the world community lead to such dire consequences that we're seeing today. By the way, including the scale of the pandemic coverage that our only world is experiencing today, became possible due to the factors listed above. The fact is that a person, due to his education, perception, and nature, sometimes perceives half measures or persuasion as a demonstration of weakness. And only a decisive reaction can stop such people from the possible criminal actions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you for that contribution. I'd now like to turn finally from the contributions from the floor to the US Peace University, are also contributing by Zoom.
Thank you very much. It's the UN Peace University in Costa Rica. So smart work requires good data, and there is a near absence of perpetrator data. I've just completed a study of 214 arrests and prosecution of child sex trafficking charges in US higher education. A draft copy of this article is available, and public data is available on NAC. We have a beta copy if anybody would like it. We'll put it in the resource room. We developed profiles for predators, their crimes, and institutional responses. And just a sample of the data, 87% of the people in higher education in America who've been recently arrested on child sex trafficking charges and prosecuted are white men, 98% male, 87% white. 51% were in leadership positions. So we looked at what position they were in their higher education institution: presidents, vice presidents, provosts, deans, general counsels. 45% in positions that provided access to vulnerable populations. So they sought out work in homeless shelters, work with the disturbed youth. 30% received awards for professional excellence. We looked at if they were arrested on campus, 27% were. If they used institutional property to commit the crime of child sex trafficking, 43% did. 42% of the children involved in these 214 arrests and prosecution in higher education were children under 10 years old. That's almost half under 10 years old, with at least 75 reports of preteen hardcore bestiality and sadomasochism. 81% entered plea deals, and 98% pleaded guilty. We looked at average jail sentences, which were 12 years, and supervised release and probation averaged 7 years. In 2019, Marcus Urguo, Keith Kaufman, and Judith Zatkin published an article called "Powerful Perpetrators Hidden in Plain Sight." They noted that there's virtually no literature on predators who use position, reputation, and wealth to become influential members of their organizations. My anti-trafficking research lab aims to fill this gap, in particular as it relates to child sex traffickers who use institutions to commit their crimes. For example, Thomas Minor, president of Franklin College in America, was recently arrested. When he was arrested, he said to the arresting officers that he was, quote, a distinguished person and he works in higher education, suggesting his powerful position offered him impunity. I hope our data will aid investigators and prosecutors in working smarter to end impunity for criminals who believe they will never face prosecution. As an academic, I believe it's critical we examine our own institutions and reveal any complicity in child sex trafficking crimes. No one should be above the law, least of all those who are educators of our children. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and I apologize, I should have said the UN Peace University, and what a strong note to finish on from the participations from the floor, what you said there about looking at institutions and the issues. We now have time for a couple of questions before we wrap up, and I'm going to refer these back to the panel. First of all, one of the questions is around financial investigations. If it's so important, why do we not have them as routine in prosecuting trafficking offences? I'd like to ask Mr. Chishnikov, what's your view on that? Why is it that financial investigations aren't routinely used in trafficking investigations? I'm not sure if he's with us. In fact, Barry Koch, perhaps I'd refer that to you now. What do you think, Barry? Why is it that we're not seeing these prosecutions used routinely with financial investigations attached?
Thank you, Kevin. They should be used more routinely. The first challenge is we need to increase awareness. I can tell you, I conduct periodic training sessions all across the US for law enforcement, for federal bank examiners, and for members of the industry. And people are sometimes surprised at the compelling stories that the data tells. And by the way, I was really struck by Laurie Baker's presentation just a moment ago. There's so much there to work with, but we need to increase awareness of the ability to use data to build a case. In the US, there are more than 200 crimes that are reportable, and the government has to state that reporting trafficking is a priority so that the financial institutions can allocate resources properly. Right now, the resourcing in the industry and in the government, for that matter, is inconsistent. The larger banks have sophisticated financial intelligence units, and they have technology capabilities that allow them to do cutting-edge analytics. The smaller institutions don't, but there's a way to address that if the government will state its priorities, and if we continue to raise awareness to the opportunities to use the data, the financial data, to make these cases.
Thank you, Barry. There have been a number of other questions asked, one particularly about EU member states that can prosecute without requiring a victim to give evidence. That may be something that we can follow up with Eurojust to see if there's some evidence that can be given there or raised in the next session. We've now got to wrap up. We're running out of time. I think the presentations today have really made it clear about some things that are being done that are incredible, but also the need for more processes that are properly in a system, that look at the evidence, look for the evidence, support the victim, and seek prosecution and convictions of the traffickers. When I look at the figures in the US TIP report for Europe, in 2019, there were 3,736 victims identified. In 2013, that number was over 10,000. And in 2018, it was 16,000. Also, when I look at convictions, there was 1,355 recorded in 2019 across the entire continent of Europe. In 2013, there were 2,684. So whilst there is progress in certain regions and areas, the facts and the figures don't always reflect that. So we have to look at what we're doing, because every time a victim is trafficked, it's a life that's damaged and destroyed. I'd like to thank all the speakers for contributing today and the contributions of the inputs from the floor. I'm sorry I had to cut some short, but we do need to keep to time. This has been a great presentation, an event for me, reflect on some of the work I've done in the past and what needs to be done in the future. I think what we need to go away from this is listen to what's been presented, particularly listen to the victims. And one of the things the OSCE or ODIHR is doing is creating victims panels, survivors panels, which you can look up, and they want survivors to be advisors on the work of human trafficking. What went wrong? What was needed? How could we have done better? So thank you very much for all the participants. Once again, thank to Val Ritchie and his team in Vienna for the great work they've done in creating this event, as difficult as it may have been during this period of COVID-19. There is another session which is starting in half an hour, I believe. What has been asked, can you stay online, don't log off whilst you have your coffee break. And the next session, as I say, will start at my side of the world at 3 p.m, your side of the world in Central Europe time, 4 p.m. So thank you very much. Thank you for participating. And I wish you all the very best in your actions in fighting human trafficking wherever you may be. Thank you.